Hi, I'm John Stevenson, and I'd like to introduce a new series as we study the book of Genesis. The first 5 books of Moses are known to the Hebrews, to the Jewish people, as the Torah. The word Torah just means the law or instruction. It's known in our English culture, and we get that from the Greek, as the Pentateuch, which simply is Greek for the 5-part book. And so these 5 books make up the Pentateuch and or Torah. Genesis is the book we're going to be looking at, and it's going to begin in the beginning, and it's going to trace the origins of God's people from creation all the way to Egypt. Exodus will pick up with the Israelites in Egypt, and it will relate God's deliverance of Israel from Egypt to the establishing of his covenant, the giving of the law, and the construction of the tabernacle. At the end of the book of Exodus, the tabernacle will be completed and God moves into the building. The book of Leviticus picks up there with the presence of God in the tabernacle, and it sets forth the laws of worship in and around the tabernacle. The book of Numbers then takes up there in front of the tabernacle and tells the rest of the story of what took place in the wilderness wanderings. So there's about 39 years in the book of Numbers. The book of Deuteronomy, as the Israelites now are ready to go into the promised land 40 years after leaving Egypt, they are given the law to this new generation with special emphasis to those who are entering the land. John Sailhamer's book, The Meaning of the Pentateuch, he says the Pentateuch was not written as modern books are. It is a collection and arrangement of ancient written sources, many of which appear to have been fragmentary and already old by the time of Moses. Indeed, Moses may have had to translate some of them into Hebrew. Now, we don't have any specific evidence to back that up, but there are perhaps pointers that suggest this might be the case. Sailhamer is not denying inerrancy, but he is saying that as the Spirit guided Moses to write these words, that he may have used previously existing sources. For example, we have the continuing refrain, and we see it for the first time in Genesis chapter 2, verse 4. These are the generations of the heaven and the earth. I think our New American Standard says this is the account of the heavens and the earth. And then in chapter 5, verse 1, this is the written account. And then in chapter 6, verse 9, this is the account. I suppose we could go with that translation, account. But I'm rather fond of the old King James Version, the way it says, these are the generations, because there's a certain generational aspect to that very word. Now notice that phrase appears 10 times throughout the book of Genesis. This is the account of the heaven and the earth, and then this is the written account of Adam's line, and this is the account of Noah, this is the account of Shem, Ham, and Japheth, and in each case it introduces the next section. And when he says, for example, this is the account of Adam's line, it's not the story, everything you need to know about Adam, but it's everything that you're going to need to know about Adam's descendants, about his generations, his line. Likewise, when we see the phrase used of, let me take the example of Abraham. You see this is the account of Terah in chapter 11, verse 25. And what follows isn't really all that much about Terah. He dies within just a few verses, and it's really the story of Abraham. And so what we have are these written records, these written accountings, and this perhaps points to certain material that Moses might have had access to, because Moses would not have been an eyewitness to any of these events. These were all long before the birth of Moses. These are the generations. As we said, we have these, and the Hebrew word there is toledoth. Elad toledoth. The word toledoth, Yalad is the word for child, or to bear. And so toledoth is the idea of a generation, that which is, is the plural. Those who have been born, those who have come down the line, as it were. There are 10 sets of these, beginning with the heavens and the earth and going all the way down through Abraham to Isaac and Jacob. 10 sets of these. And in each case, there's a history of the counting as it tells what followed from that individual. So I have 5 of those Toledoth from creation and Adam to Abraham, and then 5 Toledoth from Adam to Israel, which puts Abraham at the center of the story. And I think he is. Now, the title of the book of Genesis, we refer to it as Genesis. If you go to a Hebrew bookstore and take a Hebrew Bible, they will have a different title for it. The Hebrew title is Bereshit, and that's actually taken from the very first word of the book in Hebrew. Bereshit just means in the beginning. And so their title for the book, and this was very customary in the ancient world, when you wanted to give a title for a book, you would title it with the very first thing that you'd see as you began to open up the scroll, if it was on a scroll, or the very top of the tablet, if it was written on a clay tablet, depending on what sort of writing utensil was used. You'd have the first line, and that would serve for the title. And so the title of the book, in Hebrew at least, is Bereshit, in the beginning. Our English title is taken from the Greek title Genesis, which just means beginnings. So whether you're saying it in Hebrew or whether you're saying it in English or Greek, it's a book about beginnings. Genesis chapters 1 through 11 form, I think, something of a unit, as there are 4 events that are predominant. First, we have in chapters 1 and 2, there's creation, and then there's the fall into sin in chapter 3, but the effects of that continue into chapters 4 and 5. Then there is the story of the flood, and finally there is the story of the Tower of Babel. So 4 major events that are predominant. In Genesis chapters 12 through 50, there are 4 people who were predominant. There are Abraham and Isaac and Jacob. And although Jacob has a number of sons, there's one who's predominant, and that's Joseph. So that the first half of the book looks at the human race as a whole, even though there are some individuals that are noted. There's Adam and there's Noah. But really, it's looking at all of humanity. Whereas the second half of the book, beginning in chapter 12 through chapter 50, there's the focus upon just the family of Abraham. Yes, there are other people that are mentioned, but they're only mentioned in passing. The first half of the book spans a period of over 2,000 years. Well, how much over 2,000 years? I don't know, but it's 2,000 years plus. The second half of the book takes in a period of about roughly 250 years. So it's the second half of the book where the time element slows way down as we take a closer look at these 4 lives: Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, and Joseph. The book begins, Genesis begins with God. In the beginning, God created. But it ends on a very personal note. It ends with a corpse that is in a coffin in Egypt. And that's the Joseph story. He's going to his death, and he dies in Egypt, and he's buried in a coffin there in Egypt. There's a promise there, and we'll see that a little bit later. But still, it begins with creation, and it ends with death.